Rogers displayed in his life is something that we should all look at and we should be inspired by. And that is that we should all be friends and we should all try to basically understand each other and listen to how the other person lives and is in the world and try to gain as much from that as we possibly can. How many people here have met or have a trans person in their life that they know about? You see, this is, I promised myself I wouldn't cry. But this is the kind of thing that really provokes me to tears because, when I was you guys' age, which is, literally decades ago, this would have been literally inconceivable. And I mean that in the sense of, conceive, to conceive is to bring into being, right? And so there are things that are hard to imagine, there are things, it's literally inconceivable because at the time that I grew up in Scotland, the idea that somebody would be born in one gender and would have this anxiety, this dysphoria, that something was wrong and that the terrible mistake was made as something that you would be able to say out loud to another human being was incomprehensible to young trans people. So I grew up for decades with a lot of shame. And I physically transitioned because I knew I was a girl from the time I was 4 years old, but I physically transitioned when I was 54. And I knew by the time I was 19 that this is something you could do. So from the age of 19, to physically transition, to begin hormones and to get gender affirmation surgery, I knew all these things were possible and that there was a potential. And yet from 19 to 54, I waited. And I have a reason. There's a reason. Some of you might guess what that reason might be. But there was a reason I didn't, and it's that I was a huge pothead. And so, I'd say at 19, you should change your gender, and, be yourself, and then I'd say, you know what, you took the garbage out today, that's enough for today. You go home and smoke a fatty. And, I'm not saying this in a way that is encouraging, because I'm talking to adults here. I'm not your parent, right? I'm not your teacher. I'm just a human being sharing my story. My story happens to include, and many young LGBT people's lives include, a lot of self-medication. Because the medication that I needed from the time I was a child was estrogen. And I didn't know that, and I didn't understand that. And sometimes the drug we need is human contact, and sometimes the drug we need is to be heard and understood. And sometimes the drug we need is to say, this crowd is too much for me, and I can't handle being in the crowd. And then back in the day they would say, you will go and you will sit there, and we will through attrition demand that you sit in the crowd. And now we live in the world where a group of young people like yourselves are watching this on camera in the library because they're more comfortable in an environment that's a little smaller and a little less daunting to them because there's too many people and it causes anxiety. And I'm going to visit that group of people today. But I lived in a world where there was a certain way of being and it was like this. And now we live in the world where our ways of being are a multitude. They're manifest. And it's phenomenal and it's incredible. And it's worth preserving because it's in danger of disappearing every single day unless we with our minds will it into being. And even every day as progress is made in the LGBT community and trans people are welcome and people are able to put their hands up and say, I know somebody who's trans, or, I think my friend might be trans, or I'm trans and I'm too scared to come out, or I'll never be able to come out. Wherever place in your journey you're in, we're all able to sit here and talk about it. And so I always say, as bad as it is, and as I share the terrible stories, that I have so much gratitude that this is available at this particular time, and that I'm able to speak to you all today. And so now this part of it, I'm just going to share, what my life is like as a trans person, and give you, the good and bad. And the first thing I want to tell you is this just happened the other day to me, so it's really fresh in my mind, so I want to share it with you. You guys probably know Portage Place Mall downtown, and it's a very vibrant and busy mall, and there's a huge food court, and they have all sorts of great food there, but it's always busy, and it's always busy not because the food is so great and so delicious that everyone in the city flocks to Portage Place Mall to eat at the food court. I love Joey's Only Fish and Chips, but it's not worth the drive from, the U of M, right? And so there's another reason that so many people, and it's quite diverse if you go there, right? You'll see indigenous people, you'll see people from Somalia, you'll see people from Chad, you'll see people from Nigeria, you'll see people from Iceland, and they're all sitting, and they're often sitting kind of in ethnic clusters. People are sitting with members of their own community. Sometimes they're playing dominoes, sometimes they're just talking. And it's a manifestation of something that exists in a lot of cultures that people come from that is impossible to represent in this particular part of the world, which is a winter climate, which is that has a function of a town square. And so people gather there because in their own communities, in their own cities, in their own villages, there was a communal area where people could sit and be amongst themselves. And a school is a form of that. It's a place where people that are not our family, but are within our community and our neighborhoods can all get together and be with each other for a purpose. And the purpose of this particular case, it's to babysit you while your parents are earning money to perpetuate late stage at the click of a mouse. And so hold on to each other and hold on to these beautiful friendships you develop, because as your life gets harder and you're pulled away from things, you will remember that the people that you actually remain closest to in your life and the people that are so important to your own development are those people that are sitting beside you right now today. So take care of each other and love each other and try to learn. And try to stretch out your tentacles a little bit and say hello to people that you've never said to. And this is a nice little thing that you can try in the last few years of your class, is there's a whole population here. And so we're really going to gravitate in that population with our same kind of core group of people. And that's perfectly human and it's perfectly necessary. But every once in a while, you may see somebody every day and think they're interesting in whatever way. Maybe the way they dress is interesting to you. Maybe the way they look is interesting to you. Maybe the way they carry themselves, either in a confident manner or a kind of a dejected manner, is interesting to you. Just go up and say hello to those people. And if they say, "Who are you?" You say, "Lara said it was okay. Lara said it was okay for me to come up and talk to you." And if they say, "Who's Lara?" say, "You just don't get it." Walk on. We can't solve every problem in the world. I'm also delighted to do this because I was actually banned from, I didn't tell the organizers before the book maybe, but I'm banned from speaking to children at RSC Court School. And the reason I'm banned from speaking to children at RSC Court School, and this is tremendously important to what we're talking about in the world we live in today, which is, I was there reading a children's story to them. And so I'm reading a story, and it's during reading week. I think you guys probably have you guys have a form of kind of reading week. And so in the case of these little kids, and they're like 6, 7, 8, and wonderful kids, and I'm reading them a funny story, and we're all engaged in it. Because it's reading week, they have this thing called stop, drop, and read. And so an announcement comes on, and they go, "Stop, drop, and read." And everyone stops what they're doing, they drop to the floor, and they open a book. I suggest the whole society should have something like that, just stop, drop, and read. We all sit down and we open our books and we read them, and we make the world a better place. And so I'm reading the story, and I hear, "Stop, drop, and read." Now there's a little confusion, of course, because I'm already reading a story. So their little brains are like, they don't know what to do, right? It's conflicting information, And so I look at the teacher, and she's no help. She's looking at her phone or something. And so I said, you know what, you guys? I'm going to make an executive decision. I said, you know what, you guys? We're already reading. So we're just going to continue to read, and we're going to call that our stop, drop, and read activity. And if I had stopped there, I would still be welcome at the school. But part of my problem in life, and part of the reason I'm a good stand-up comic, is I never stop there. I just, whatever thought pops into my evil head, I just spit it out. And so I say, so we're already reading, so we're just going to continue to do that. And then I add, and besides, just because somebody yells a command out of a loudspeaker doesn't mean we should always listen. Which is a terribly important lesson in life. A terribly important lesson in life. And so I finish the reading and it goes well. And everybody thinks I'm great, and everybody, all the kids, you know, when's Lara coming back? Lara was great. Can Lara do another story? And I run into the teacher, who happens also to be a relation of mine, and she says, oh yeah, it went great, everything was good. And then I felt very good about myself. You know, I thought, I'm transmitting to the younger generation. Am I not an exceptional person? And I think I bought myself some cookies or something just to... And then she phones me a week later and she says, you're not allowed to come and speak at the school anymore. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, there's a young guy in the class and he was really acting up, and he was actually, you know, he was being rough with one of the other kids. And I couldn't handle him, so I went down to the principal and I said, please call this child down to the office. And so they called his name, and he didn't go. And they called his name again, and he didn't go. And they called his name a third time and he didn't go, and the principal had to go down, and this is how they would have done in my day, but they didn't. They grabbed me by the earlobe, and they pulled him down to the office and they sit him down and they say, before we even talk about what you did today, I want to know why I called your name 3 times on the announcement and you didn't respond. And he says, just because someone barks an order out of a loudspeaker doesn't mean you have to listen. And the horrified principal says, who told you that? And he says, Lara Ray. And the principal says, who's Lara Ray? And then they found out, and now I'm never allowed to speak there anymore. But that's true. That's very, very true. And that's the type of information, you know, that is very, very, very useful. And obviously you guys are nuanced enough to understand the difference between if I told you guys that story and then you did something wrong and they called you down to the office. You would be able to make that distinction because you have the critical faculties to do so. But as a general principle, and as something that makes people like me, transgender people living in a non-transgender world, have extreme difficulties, and to be the victim of persecution, discrimination, as many of you are, and violence to the tune of 335 trans people were murdered last year for existing. Part of that is because when people say things out of the loudspeaker, they often reinforce a dominant story and a dominant narrative that is not always commensurate with reality. In other words, there are so many different ways of being in the world that we are slowly, very slowly, unpacking ourselves from some of the things we assume to be rigid, written in stone, as they used to say. And part of those studies, when you get to university and learn about them, are unpacking colonization, or unpacking religious prejudice, and unpacking prejudice against LGBT people. But I'm going to return to the food court. And so we're sitting in the food court, and I'm talking to my friend on the phone. My friend lives in Toronto, and it's very noisy. As I said, it's like a town square, and so it's very noisy. So I put the headphones in, and I'm talking to my friend like this on my cell phone, and just we're catching up. She's a good old friend of mine. And then all of a sudden, I look over, and there's a man sitting about where this young person is sitting right here. This young person is sitting right here. And, you know, and I paused, because, you know, this is part of what I have to unpack. I was going to say this young lady or this young woman because that's how I was socialized, but I don't know how you identify. And so, you know, now I say this young person. So this young person, sitting about where this young person is this man. And I'm talking to my friend on the phone. And he's got, you know that squint when people close one eye? You know, in different cultures, like, El Diablo. You know, that's right? And so it's like this, he's like squinting and pointing. Like very rude, you know. It's like this, really aggressive face. So I think, you know what, I'm going to ignore it. I'll just ignore it. I keep talking to my friend. And then I just turn again. And there he is again. But this time he's got a friend beside him. And he's whispered something to his friend. And now his friend's doing it. It's contagious. You know, his friend is pointing and whispering. And at this point, I don't feel threatened, but I feel upset. I feel isolated. I feel othered. I feel all those things we feel when somebody is calling us out as someone who's different from everyone else. I feel all those things intensely, and it's not a pleasant feeling. And so I keep talking to my friend. And then there's 3 women at the table too. And so now they've joined into it, and then they're polite enough that they don't squint and point, but they're looking at me. And they have that same kind of face. What the hell's going on? Who is this? What's going on over there? And my heart starts to pound, you know, when you're bullied like that, your heart starts to pound. And so my friend now can hear it in my voice that I'm terribly upset. And she said, what's wrong, Lara? And I tell her, and she goes, oh, just ignore it if you can. And so we keep talking. But then I turn, pointing, turn, point, it keeps going on. And then, in what I would have described at the time as the ultimate act of erasure, they get up from their seats and they move away and they sit down with their backs to me. And at this point I feel that kind of, you know, don't cry, you know, don't cry in public, but I'm just, you know, I'm just so upset, so raw. And that's what it feels like. It's raw. It's like you've been cut open and someone's just poking at it. That's what it feels like. And so I finish the call and I say, you know what? I'm going to go over and I'm going to talk to them. And I'm going to tell them, you know what? Like, this isn't a one-way mirror. I can see you, right? And I don't know what's going on, but it's rude. And maybe we should talk about it, you know? But, you know, that is exhausting. And anyone that has to deal with any kind of prejudice will tell you, it's utterly and completely exhausting on top of the other crap you have to deal with. Every single day, you have to do this emotional labor. And it's exhausting. But at this point, I think, you know what? It's a bridge too far. I'm going to go, and I'm going to confront them. And then just before I do, this other woman, who's not at their table, comes up to me, and she says, do you know your cell phone flashlight is on? And so, every time I'm talking on the phone, I'm shining this laser beam in this poor man's face, and he's squinting and pointing, you know, and his friend is like squinting and pointing and stuff. So now I realize I'm the jackass, right? So I go over and I say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you say something? And he goes, oh, I'm terribly sorry, miss. We saw you were on the phone and we didn't want to say anything. Right? And so, that's funny. That's a funny story. But at the same time, it contains a lot of important things that I want to pass on to you, which is that I made the mistake. I made a presumption that there was hostility towards me that actually didn't exist. So one has to be careful. But at the same time, it is also important, if you are not somebody that experiences that kind of hostility because you are not a visible or sexual minority, you have to be patient and understand that people who are constantly in a situation where they feel that kind of a threat, that societal threat, that they are other and they are different, are going to make these mistakes. And so as a human being, I try to approach people even when I know unemphatically that they're being hostile towards me, usually verbally. I still make a choice that I'm gonna meet them in a place of kind of peace and reconciliation. And then you don't make an ass of yourself. So in that particular case, I did not make an ass of myself because I didn't go up and say, "How dare you!" And because I already knew going in that I had screwed it up and I had made a mistake. But I made that terrible presumption, and that can be something that happens. But having said that, that type of thing, what I assumed might have been happening, is something that happens to me over and over and over and over again. And that's because I am now a visual representation of who I am inside. I've decided to make the physical transition. But there's a concept in trans studies called kind of passing privilege, right? And so because of my voice and because of some of the ways I carry myself with my physicality, even though I have, a female body and I take hormones and I've had surgery and so on, and so, physically I'm very similar. At the same time, many of you here would say that's a trans woman, that's a transgender woman, and so that's fine. That's something I accept. I'm very proud to be a transgender woman, but at the same time, it does make my life more difficult than some young people who are transitioning earlier, who would pass almost 1,000% as being cisgendered women. And in some ways their lives are going to be a little bit easier. But passing should not be the criteria by which I am met as being equal in society, the same way that dressing the same as everyone else in the class, or having the same religious faith, or being the same color as everyone else in the class is a necessity towards acceptance. I should be accepted for who I am because I am no better than anyone here today, but at the same time I am no worse than any of you here today, with one unique distinction, which is how I choose to behave. Because that is something that is in my control and something that I'm able to have some kind of agency over. Things that I cannot choose are that I was born transgender, that I felt it physically and emotionally necessary to make a physical transition, as some people choose to do and some people choose not to do. I have no control over those things. But how I behave is very different. I can be a trans woman and a beautiful and important and inspiring part of your life, or I can be a trans woman and be a destructive and terrible and horrible influence on your life, based on the choices I make and how I choose to behave and interact with other people. And that is the internal journey that, even if we have nothing to change within ourselves physically, that we need to heal. And most of that pain, as you probably understand, comes from emotion, right? That any response to transgender people, or any response to anybody, quite frankly, that is different from you, may be partially the cause of your upbringing from an intellectual standpoint. In other words, if your parents are homophobic or transphobic, as many parents are, homophobic, transphobic, racist, prejudiced, ill-informed, whatever they might be, many people grow up, and I grew up in the world, and my parents were better than most, but I grew up in a world where that was the default. To be homophobic and transphobic was to be normal. And so within that, though, there were differences. There were people that thought that homosexuality was wrong because that's what we were taught. And there are people that thought homosexuality was wrong, and so I'm going to kick the shit out of somebody who I think might be gay. And why is it some people turn out one way and some people turn out another way? And that is because we allow an emotional response to interfere with what we have learned. And we can unlearn transphobia, we can unlearn homophobia, we can unlearn racism, we can unlearn all these things. but our actual emotional responses to things will not change until we do the work to heal ourselves emotionally and be authentic, honest people. And that is to say, and this sounds like a cliche, but you can't love other people until you love and care for yourself. And so loving and care for yourself. If you want to help people like me get along better in the world, if you want to help anybody that is different from you get along better in the world, then love yourself, and then that opens your heart to love other people. And does someone have a clock?
9:21.
9:21. And what time am I to go to?
9:30-ish.
9:30-ish. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up, so to speak, and then there's probably a whole bunch of questions that are a bit more kind of direct, you know, that you might want to ask me. Things that, you know, that I would frame under the idea of curiosity. And so if anyone has any question that they want to ask me, I'm going to say this sincerely. And as I said, I've done this, I've done Q&As at Stony Mountain, okay? And so if you think your question is horrible and stupid, trust me, I have heard really, really terrible, horrible questions, and honestly, I don't care. And I know that you people are polite, so I don't think that there's anybody here that's going to ask me something that's going to make me cry or offend me. But for the purpose of this exercise, I just want to say there's nothing that you're going to ask me that's going to embarrass me, and there's nothing that you're going to ask me that I'm not going to try to answer, even if my answer is, I'm not going to tell you that because it's private, and it's actually, to be honest, slightly inappropriate that you would ask me. And that's as harsh as I'm going to be if I don't like the question. But I also want to say one caveat, because I'm really opening myself up here. One caveat before we do that is to tell you that any answer I give you, or any experience I have about being a transgender person, is exclusive to myself. In other words, my way of being trans, my way of being a woman, my way of speaking, my way of being in the world is particular and original to me. And so I do not speak for all trans people in the same way that if someone was up here talking about being Muslim or Islam, they would be sharing their personal experience and the things they know in their knowledge base, but at the same time they would not be speaking for the Ummah, they would not be speaking for the great, you know, population of trans people in the world. And so we have this mic, but I think that you guys are vocal, and I've heard you guys in the hall, so I know you can be noisy. And so just yell it out. As I said, just heckle me, and if I don't hear you, I'll ask you to repeat it, and we'll go. And I know that everybody has a question, so I'm not going to sit here and let you pretend that you don't have a million things you want to ask me. I want you to show some courage, as I have standing up here, and I want you to talk to me, and I want you to ask me some questions, if you may, please. Yes.
What is that?
Stand up. Gabby, stand up.
Stand up.
Over there.
Hi there.
Hi.
What's your name?
Yeah.
Right, it is. Hi, Gabby. I'll be like this talk show person.
Were you ever like really scared or nervous when you decided that you were gonna go for surgery?
That's a very good question, right? So I went, and this is interesting. So this time last year, so around, you know, if you're from a Christian tradition, obviously this is the, you know, we call it the holiday season, it's the Christmas season. But just before Christmas, 3 years ago, it's very hard to believe, they phoned me and they said, you want to come to Montreal and get gender confirmation surgery? So, yes, vagina, there is a Santa Claus. And so I went. So I went to Montreal because this is where they do the surgery. And for 90 minutes, while some of you were out shopping, while some of you were celebrating other holidays, while some of you were just going on in your life, I'm there frozen from here down, my legs in stirrups as they do this operation. But of course it's in Quebec, right? So they're maple stirrups. But yes, I'm 56 years old. And they were going to, and here's something that is a general proposition, which is, do you guys know what is in a surgical procedure that has been done 1,000 times and is not done under stress? In other words, you're not trying to fix something and keep a patient alive. If you were doing surgery on what is otherwise a healthy human being, do you guys know off the top of your head what the #1 potential problem that can go wrong in surgery is?
Leaving something in it?
What's that, sorry?
Leaving something in
Leaving
it.
something in there is very dangerous and thankfully quite rare, but it's actually, anyone else? Yes?
Oh, hang on.
Hold on.
Infection?
Oh, you have a question? Okay, let me answer the surgery and I'll get your question. I'll jump ahead. It's anesthetic. It's anesthetic. It's the idea that you might not wake up. And many people don't wake up, or they wake up with serious problems. So many anesthetic, going under, as they say. Putting somebody in a comatose state for the purpose of performing the surgery without pain is one of the most dangerous things. And so here's the most important thing I said about that. In order to avoid that harm, that potential harm, I was awake during the entire surgery. And that's where every male identifying person in the room looks at their phone or their shoes and looks very embarrassed and thinks, holy shit. I stayed awake during the surgery. But yes, of course I was terrified. But you know what I decided? I decided, and this is terribly important, this is tantamount, I decided it was a life and death decision. And I could no longer live the way I was living, and so I was going to take the risk. And having said that, the risk is extremely small. The doctor that did this procedure, this general affirmation surgery, this vagioplasty, this general reassignment surgery, has done 3,000 of them, and actually did 5 procedures on the day that I got my surgery done. And so from that standpoint, from a statistical standpoint, I knew that I was in good hands, but yes, I was scared to death. And then of course, infection and is everything going to work and all those kind of things were also extremely stress causing. And you don't know for a long time because there's so much, you know, I had a pouch coming out like this, like a big swollen thing, like this for about 4 months before the swelling went down. So it takes about 1.5 years before you know if everything's working and everything's going to be okay. But do you know this? For people that elect to get general confirmation surgery, even when the results are not what they expected, and even when there are complications, 90% of patients report that they are happy that they got the surgery. Among those that got the surgery and everything went well, like me, it's 100% satisfactory. This young person over here had a question.
So after you changed your gender, what was your family reaction like? How did they respond?
That's a very good question. So if you didn't hear what she asked, she said, after I decided to transition, how did my parents react? How did my 80-year-old parents react? And so my parents were in Florida when I decided, and so I waited till they got back so that my mother wouldn't faint in another country. And so they got back home, and I thought, for a lot of reasons, I'll tell my mother first. And so my mother's on the phone as I'm telling her, and if you have old parents, and this is across cultures, my dad's standing trying to hear what's going on. What are they saying? What? Shut up! What? And so this is going on in my ear. And then I guess my dad's standing there. His name's Colin. He's 81 years old, an old Scottish man. And he's standing there. And my mom, who is very practical, so I've told her for 5 minutes, and then she says, well, she's Scottish. Well, you can't have the same name. You can't, we gave you a boy's name, we didn't know. She says, so what are we going to call you? And I said, Lara. She says, Lara. How do you spell that? And I said, L-A-R-A. And she goes, L-A-R-A. And I guess at that point, my dad had been able, through the one-ended conversation, to put it all together, and boom, now he knew what would happen, you know? And so, at that point, he realizes what I've told my mom, and my mom goes, "Your dad's gone onto the balcony." This is where my dad goes to think. And so I talked to my mom for about another hour about why, and you know, they didn't know, and we do all this talk. And every 5 minutes, my mother will say, "Colin, don't jump!" And then everything else was just practical. And so I called my sister because I told her first. And I said, "I'm calling my parents tonight." And I said, "So expect them at your door at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." And so 2 minutes to 9 the next day she calls and she goes, "They're at my door." And so the whole family gets together. And we already had, and this is part of living in 2019, we already had a trans person in our family. So that wasn't even special anymore. And so River, my trans nephew, was there, and all my nephews and nieces and my cousins, and there's about 10 people there. And everyone's on side. And my dad is on side, but he's very practical. So it's just a lot of my dad pacing, asking questions. "Well, what am I going to say at the church if they say, 'How's your son?'" And then my sister would say, "Well, you can say, 'Fine.' Or you can say, 'Lara transitioned.' Or you can say nothing. It's your choice to share this information or not share this information." And this brings tears to my eyes. So for the first time in his life, that year, my dad wrote what used to be known as the traditional Christmas letter and sent it out to the family around the world. "Well, it's been an interesting year in the Ray family." And then this, and this. And then it was like somebody did this, somebody died, somebody got a job, somebody did this. And we have a new member of the family. And he tells the story of my transition. So that's the way it went. And so I'm so lucky. And I thank the world and the universe every single day that I have parents that are so accepting and understanding, and I understand the privilege of that because so many of our community don't have that. And that's why 60% of people your age who are homeless or live with food or shelter insecurity identify in the LGBT community because they are not on the street because of anything that they have done. They are on the street because they have been rejected by the people who claim to love them. And so I want to live in a world where that doesn't happen anymore. And you need to be the families of the people who are rejected by those who claim to love them. And you have to be the love and support they need. And I hear that noise, which is the impatience of youth as they wish to scatter. Okay? Wait! Look! Do not interrupt my standing ovation. Do not interrupt my standing ovation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You guys, don't move yet. We have a couple things we have to tell you. Please, sit down, sit down.
Thank you.
1 more minute.
I will be here for a couple of minutes.
Just have a seat. 1 more
Someone
minute.
ask me everything privately.
Okay, on behalf of the staff and students at Richmond Collegiate, we want to thank Lara for coming, taking the time and giving us a motivational and inspirational and the courage to be who you are and to inspire young people to do the same. So thank you very much.